Mata Hari, the seductive spy of the Great War. In an age of kings and empires, of whispers and shadows, there lived a woman who defied every rule society had written for her. She danced in palaces, she dined with generals, she toyed with the hearts of powerful men, and when the Great War swallowed Europe in blood and fire, she became something far more dangerous. Her name was Mata Hari. Roots of a legend. She was not born Mata Hari, she was born Margaretha Gertruida Zell. On August 7, 1876, in the small Dutch town of Leeuwarden, her father, Adam Zell, was a hat merchant, a showman in his own way, with a taste for luxury and an eye for charm. Young Margaretha grew up in satin dresses and silk ribbons, the kind of life that made her believe the world was meant to adore her. But the illusion shattered quickly. Adam's business collapsed, bankruptcy stripped the family of wealth, and scandal drove her parents apart. Her mother died soon after. At just 15, Margaretha was effectively abandoned, sent to live with relatives. For most young women of that time, such a fall from grace meant a quiet life of obscurity. But not for Margaretha. She still believed she was destined for more than the grey streets of Leeuwarden. The escape to the east. At 18, she spotted an advertisement in a Dutch newspaper. A colonial officer stationed in the East Indies seeks a well-bred young woman for marriage. The officer was Rudolph MacLeod, 20 years her senior, a decorated soldier. He was charming, and more importantly, a ticket to a new life far away from the past. They married quickly, and Margaretha left the cold streets of the Netherlands behind, sailing across oceans to the lush, humid islands of the Dutch East Indies. Today, as Indonesia and Java, she discovered a world of vivid colors, intoxicating scents, and sacred traditions. She became fascinated with local culture, especially the slow, ritualistic dances of the Javanese temples, movements that told stories without words, stories of gods and lovers, betrayal and longing. She studied these dances with devotion, learning how each gesture, each glance could convey desire or sorrow. But paradise had its shadows. Rudolph was not the gallant officer she had imagined. He drank heavily, his temper flaring into violence. His affairs with other women were open and cruel. They had 2 children, but tragedy struck when their young son Norman died, allegedly poisoned by a disgruntled servant. The grief carved deep wounds into Margaretha's heart. By 1902, the marriage had collapsed. Margaretha took her surviving daughter and returned to Europe. But life there was harsh. She had no fortune, no husband, and now no child. She was forced to leave her daughter in the care of relatives while she tried to survive in Paris. In that city, Margaretha would be reborn. The birth of Mata Hari. Paris in the early 1900s was a place intoxicated with the new artists, poets, and dreamers. Filled its smoky cafes, the city worshipped the exotic, the stranger, the mystery. Margaretha knew this, and so she created a new identity. She became Mata Hari, a name plucked from the Malay language, meaning eye of the day, the sun itself. She told anyone who asked that she was the daughter of a Javanese princess and a British officer trained in sacred temple dances. From childhood, in truth, much of it was invention. But the lie was wrapped so beautifully in silk and gold, few cared to question it. Her performances were unlike anything Europe had seen. She stepped onto the stage draped in shimmering veils, her dark hair crowned in jeweled headpieces. As the music began, she moved like liquid fire, veils falling one by one until she was almost bare, her body a living sculpture in the flicker of gaslight. This was not crude seduction, it was theater, ritual, and fantasy all at once. Paris was captivated. Critics compared her to a goddess, audiences left in a trance, a web of power and desire. Mata Hari's fame brought her into the orbit of the wealthy and the powerful. She became a fixture in the salons of aristocrats, the private dinners of politicians, the guarded quarters of military officers. She was more than a performer, she was a companion, a confidant, sometimes a lover. Her lovers were men of influence, captains of industry, diplomats, generals. Through pillow talk and intimate evenings, she learned things, small details, whispered frustrations, hints of plans. She listened. She remembered she could move across borders freely, her celebrity granting her a kind of diplomatic immunity. One week she was in Berlin dining with German officers. The next she was in Paris laughing with French generals. Her charm was her passport, her beauty, her disguise. The Great War begins in 1914. The First World War erupted, ripping Europe apart. Millions of men were thrown into the trenches. Nations tightened their borders, their secrets guarded more fiercely than ever. But Mata Hari still moved freely, still danced, still entertained men from both sides of the conflict. To some, she was simply a courtesan in a world of death. To others, she was a dangerous woman, a spy hiding in plain sight. Codename H-21. In 1916, French intelligence grew suspicious. They claimed to have intercepted German communications, naming Mata Hari as Agent H-21, a German spy. The accusation was damning. It was said she had been recruited in Madrid by German intelligence and tasked with seducing Allied officers to extract military secrets. Mata Hari denied it all. She insisted she had only ever loved France, that she had even offered her services to French intelligence to help the war effort. But there were problems. She accepted money from a German officer. She claimed it was repayment for furs that had been confiscated during the war, but to her accusers it was proof of payment for espionage. The rest. In February 1917, Mata Hari returned to Paris. She checked into the Hotel Plaza Athénée, as she often did, but the next morning French police arrived at her door. She was arrested on charges of espionage and taken to prison. The newspapers exploded with the story. The public, exhausted by years of war, needed someone to blame for the endless casualties. The image of the exotic dancer who had charmed generals and betrayed France was too perfect a villain to resist the trial. Mata Hari's trial was held in July 1917, and it was more theater than justice. The prosecution painted her as the ultimate femme fatale, using her lovers to bleed secrets from the veins of France. They claimed her intelligence work had caused the deaths of over 50,000 soldiers. They produced letters, receipts, intercepted messages, but little that would stand as solid proof. Still, the tide of opinion was against her. She was a foreigner, a woman, and one who had lived outside the bounds of respectable society. In the court of public opinion, she had already been condemned. The final morning, October 15, 1917, dawn broke pale over the Parisian sky. Mata Hari, dressed with care, dark coat, wide-brimmed hat, high heels. She refused to wear a blindfold. She refused to be tied to the post. She faced the firing squad with her chin high, her gaze unwavering. Witnesses said she smiled. Some swore she blew a final kiss. The officer raised his sword. The command was given. 12 rifles cracked. Mata Hari felt her body crumpling into the cold earth. The shadow of a question. Was she truly a cunning double agent, slipping secrets between the sheets? Or was she a scapegoat, a beautiful woman executed to feed the hunger of a nation desperate for revenge? The truth remains hidden in the fog of war. Some historians believe she exaggerated her spy work to seem more important than she was. Others insist she was guilty. What is certain is this: on that morning in 1917, the world lost not just a woman, but a legend. Mata Hari, the woman who danced her way into history and into the line of fire, the girl who watched the world through windows. Long before she was Mata Hari, before the stage lights and the silks, Margaretha was just a girl sitting at her father's shop window, watching the world. Her father's hat store was a colorful stage. In itself, hats with ribbons and feathers sat proudly on stands, catching the eyes of passing ladies. Margaretha loved to sit behind the glass, peering out as people passed. She studied faces, the way mouths tightened when gossip was whispered, the way eyes lit up at a compliment. Those long hours taught her something priceless: how to read people, a skill she would carry into her future life as a courtesan and perhaps a spy. The Javanese transformation in Java. Her transformation began, though she did not yet know it. At military gatherings she played the perfect officer's wife, smiling, polite, effortlessly charming. But in the privacy of her veranda she studied the slow, deliberate dance of temple performers. The women would move with hypnotic precision, fingers curved like petals, eyes shifting in rhythm to the music. Margaretha realized the power in those gestures. The way a tilt of the chin could suggest desire, or a single glance could command attention. In the tropical nights, with the air heavy and sweet, she practiced alone, hands tracing stories in the moonlight. Her dance was no longer just art. It was a language, Paris, and the craft of seduction. By the time she reached Paris, Margaretha knew exactly what she wanted to be: not just a dancer, not just a courtesan. She would be an enigma, someone the world could never quite claim or explain. Her first big performance at the Musée Guimet was a revelation. The room was hushed as she entered. Draped in jewels and flowing scarves, the air was scented faintly with exotic incense she had burned. Backstage the dance began, slowly, delicate hand movements, each a whisper of her Javanese training. Then the scarves fell one by one, revealing not just her body, but a persona the audience could not resist. The sacred priestess from the East, untouchable yet inviting. She would pause mid-movement, locking eyes with a man in the front row, letting the silence stretch until he looked away. Every second was calculated. She wasn't just performing, she was controlling the room, the men, and the information. Her lovers included barons, colonels, diplomats, even princes in their company. She played many roles, sometimes playful, sometimes vulnerable, sometimes fiercely independent. In candlelit rooms, over glasses of champagne, they would speak of campaigns, troop movements, shortages of supplies. Men at war needed to talk, and Mata Hari knew how to listen without seeming to pry. Some historians believe she gathered such details not with the intention of selling them, but because she thrived on knowing more than others. Knowledge, like beauty, Was power the war and the alleged missions when the war began? Her life became more dangerous, borders closed, passports were scrutinized, but Mata Hari still traveled under the excuse of her performances and personal engagements. The Germans claimed she met with their intelligence in Madrid in 1916, agreeing to pass along French military plans. French intelligence, however, suspected her long before this, believing she had been working for the enemy from the war's earliest days. There were stories, perhaps true, perhaps invented, of her seducing a young Russian pilot to learn about his missions, or charming a Belgian officer for access to encrypted codes. It is impossible to separate fact from myth, but the whispers alone were enough to doom her. The trial theater of war. Her trial at the Palais de Justice was not simply about Mata Hari. It was about France itself, battered, exhausted, desperate for a symbol of defiance. The courtroom was packed. The press circled like vultures. Prosecutor Captain Pierre Bouchardon painted her as a luxury prostitute whose greed outweighed loyalty. He thundered. She did not hesitate to offer her body to the enemy, in exchange for gold that would buy her silks and perfumes. While our soldiers froze in the trenches, Mata Hari, wearing a simple dark dress and a black hat, answered calmly, "I am guilty of loving many men, but I have never betrayed France." Her defense attorney argued that no solid evidence linked her to German espionage. The so-called intercepted messages could easily have been planted to frame her, but in 1917, logic bowed to anger. The verdict was decided before the trial began. The last hours, in her cell at Saint Lazare prison, she spent the night before her execution writing letters. One was to her daughter, Louise Jean, another was to her lawyer, thanking him for his efforts. The nuns offered her spiritual comfort, but she declined confession. "I will die with my head held high," she said at dawn. She dressed carefully, stockings, a tailored coat, gloves. She pinned a feathered hat to her hair and asked for a mirror. She wanted, she said, to look beautiful for her death. On the ride to the firing range, she sat upright, gazing out at the Paris streets. One last time people bustled past, unaware of the condemned woman in their midst. Execution at Vincennes. The morning was cold at the Vincennes fortress. 12 soldiers stood ready. The officer in charge offered to blindfold her. She refused. As she walked to the post, her heels clicked against the stones. Each step deliberate. She looked directly at the men who would shoot her, her expression unreadable when the order came. She did not flinch. She fell instantly. The legend of Mata Hari sealed in the gun smoke. Aftermath and theories. Decades later, secret archives began to open. Some historians argued the French had exaggerated her crimes to hide their own intelligence failures. Others claimed she was a minor spy at most, hardly worth a death sentence. A few believe she worked for both sides, but not out of ideology, only out of necessity, to maintain her lifestyle. Whatever the truth, her name remains synonymous with the dangerous allure of the femme fatale. She has been immortalized in films, novels, and songs, a reminder that in war, the lines between loyalty and survival are often blurred. Final reflection. Mata Hari's life was a performance, and her death, the final act. Whether villain or victim, she was always in control of her image, even in her last breath. Perhaps that is why we still speak her name. In the theater of espionage, reality may be fleeting, but legend endures. Nancy Wake, the White Mouse, a girl from Wellington. She was born far from the thunder of war. On August 30th, 1912, in Wellington, New Zealand, Nancy Grace Augusta Wake's early years were humble. Crowded trams, salt on the air, the slap of waves on the pier. When she was still a child, her family moved to Australia, but even there the household was unsettled. Her father abandoned them without warning. Nancy's mother was strict, pious, and unbending, a sharp contrast to the girl's wild streak. She longed for escape. At 16, Nancy left home. By her 20s, she had saved enough to travel to London, and from there she made her way to Paris. It was a different world, full of jazz clubs, cheap wine, and the intoxicating possibility that she could become whoever she wanted to be. Paris, before the storm in the 1930s. Paris was the heartbeat of Europe. Nancy found work as a journalist, reporting for newspapers in the Hearst chain. It was during an assignment in Vienna that she witnessed something that would change her forever. Nazi thugs in the street beating Jewish men while others watched in silence. It wasn't just brutality, it was organized, sanctioned hatred. Nancy vowed that if she ever had the chance, she would fight them back. In France, she met and fell in love with a wealthy industrialist named Henry Fiocca. They married in 1939, a union of opposites, Henry calm and refined, Nancy impulsive and fiery. Their happiness would be short-lived. In September of that year, Hitler's armies marched into Poland, and Europe was at war. The first steps into the shadows. When France fell in 1940, Nancy could have fled with Henry to safety. Instead, she stayed. She joined the French resistance, almost without hesitation, beginning with small acts, delivering messages, smuggling documents, finding safe houses for Allied airmen who had been shot down. Her charm, quick wit, and fluent French made her an ideal courier. German soldiers often waved her through checkpoints without question, but soon her missions became more dangerous. Nancy began escorting escapees across the Pyrenees into neutral Spain. It was grueling days of trekking through cold mountain passes, avoiding German patrols carrying forged papers. That could mean death if discovered. The Gestapo started to notice her. They nicknamed her the White Mouse because no matter how close they came, she always slipped away. The net tightens. By 1943, Nancy was one of the most wanted people in France. The Gestapo plastered her photograph on wanted posters, offering 5 million francs for her capture when her network was compromised. Henry urged her to leave immediately. She promised she would return. It was a promise she would never keep. Henry was later captured and executed by the Germans, though Nancy wouldn't learn of his fate until after the war. Her escape took her across the mountains once more into Spain, then to England. There she joined the Special Operations Executive, Britain's secret sabotage and espionage organization. She trained in weapons demolition and unarmed combat. One instructor noted, "She is a natural killer, highly skilled in silent elimination." Returned to France. The parachute drop, April 1944. Under the cover of night, Nancy Wake parachuted into the Auvergne region of France. She landed, awkwardly tangled in her parachute lines. A local resistance leader ran to help her, greeting her with a grin. "I hope that all the trees in France bear such beautiful fruit this year." Nancy brushed herself off and got straight to work. Her mission: to coordinate and arm the Maquis resistance fighters. In preparation for D-Day, life in the Maquis in the rugged hills of central France. Nancy lived among the Maquis, a ragtag army of farmers, deserters, and ex-soldiers. She biked hundreds of kilometers through dangerous territory to deliver messages and arrange weapons drops. On one such mission, she cycled over 300 kilometers in 3 days, evading patrols and narrowly avoiding capture. She organized sabotage operations that destroyed railway lines, derailed trains, and cut German supply routes. Her work crippled Nazi logistics in the region. Fire and blood. Sometimes the war demanded more than cunning. In one fierce firefight with German troops, Nancy fought alongside her men, firing a Sten gun until her hands were raw. She did not hesitate to pull the trigger when survival demanded it. On another occasion, when a young woman in her unit was suspected of being a German spy, Nancy made the grim decision herself, taking the woman into the woods and shooting her to prevent the risk of betrayal. It haunted her for the rest of her life. But in wartime, mercy could mean death for many. D-Day and liberation. When Allied troops landed in Normandy in June 1940, for Nancy's resistance group sprang into action. They launched coordinated attacks on German positions, keeping enemy forces too busy in the interior to reinforce the beaches. By August, France was on the brink of liberation. Nancy, exhausted and battle-worn, had become a legend among the Maquis. To them, she was not just the White Mouse, she was a leader who had risked everything for their cause. After the guns fell silent after the war, Nancy learned of Henry's execution. She returned to Marseille to find their home empty, their life together reduced to memories. She never forgave herself for leaving, though she knew she had no choice. The French government awarded her the Croix de Guerre 3 times. The British made her a member of the Order of the British Empire. The United States awarded her the Medal of Freedom, yet she remained humble, even mischievous. When asked years later how she had survived, she said, "I was never afraid. I wanted to kill Germans, that's why I survived." Final years and legacy. Nancy Wake eventually remarried and moved to Australia, then England, then back again. In her later years, she lived alone in a small London flat, still sharp-toned and fiercely independent. She died in 2011 at the age of 98, her ashes scattered in the mountains of France, where she had once fought to the end. She insisted she had simply done what was necessary, but history remembers her as one of the most effective and fearless resistance leaders of the Second World War, a woman who turned the Nazis' own nickname for her into a badge of honor. The White Mouse had outlived the cat across the mountains. The escape was brutal. The Pyrenees were cold and unforgiving, the trails patrolled by German border guards. At one checkpoint, she distracted a soldier by pretending to be a lost tourist. Days later, with her feet blistered and bleeding, she crossed into Spain, only to be arrested by local police, suspicious of her papers. After several tense weeks, British diplomats secured her release from Spain. She traveled to London. She was thinner, harder, and more determined than ever, training for war. In London, Nancy was recruited into the Special Operations Executive. Her training was grueling. She learned to handle explosives, pick locks, and kill a man silently with her bare hands. She impressed her instructors with her fearlessness. In a mock interrogation, she endured hours of Psychological pressure without breaking, one trainer remarked. She'll make a bloody good agent, as long as she doesn't get herself killed. She had no intention of dying. Not yet returned to France. The parachute drop, April 1944. The moon was a pale coin in the night sky. Nancy stood at the open door of a Lysander aircraft, the wind tearing at her clothes. The jump light went green. She leapt. The ground rushed up. She landed hard, tangled in her parachute lines, cursing in both English and French. A resistance fighter appeared, grinning. I hope all the trees in France bear such beautiful fruit this year. Nancy just laughed. There was no time for embarrassment. Her mission was clear. Arm the Maquis, train them and prepare them for the coming invasion. Life in the Maquis. The Maquis were farmers and shopkeepers, students and deserters. They lived rough, sleeping in barns or under the stars, eating whatever they could steal or forage. Nancy adapted quickly. She organized weapons drops, coordinated sabotage, and built trust among the fighters. When radios were damaged in a skirmish, she set out on a 300-kilometer bike ride across enemy territory to deliver critical codes, a journey that took her through villages, crawling with German soldiers. Every road was a risk. Every handshake could be betrayal, fire, and blood. In July 1944, her unit was attacked by a German patrol. Bullets tore through the trees. Nancy grabbed a Sten gun and returned fire, shouting orders. Her men followed her lead, and the Germans withdrew, leaving their dead behind. There were darker moments. A young French woman was accused of being a German spy. The men hesitated, unwilling to act. Nancy volunteered. She led the woman into the woods and did what had to be done. It was the part of war Nancy never spoke about, except once years later when she admitted, I don't like killing, but if you threaten my people, I'll kill without hesitation. D-Day and liberation. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed in Normandy. Nancy's Maquis launched relentless attacks on German supply lines, blowing bridges, derailing trains, ambushing convoys. One operation destroyed a key railway line, delaying an entire German division from reaching the coast. The Maquis paid for every victory in blood, but their work saved countless Allied lives. By August, the German hold on France was crumbling. In the town she passed through, people cheered, tossed flowers, and shouted, Vive la France! Vive la Souris Blanche! Long live the White Mouse! After the guns fell silent, when the war ended, Nancy went to Marseille to find Henry. She was told he had been executed by the Gestapo for refusing to give up her location. She never remarried for many years, unable to replace what she had lost. She was decorated by France, Britain, and the United States, but she wore her medals rarely. She once quipped, medals don't help you sleep at night. Later life, she moved between Australia, England, and France. In politics, she ran for office in Australia, but lost. She claimed politics was too full of bastards to be worth the trouble. In her later years, she became a fixture in London pubs, always with a gin in hand, always ready with a story. When asked what made her so effective as a spy, she smiled and said, I was good at hiding in plain sight. I could drink any man under the table, and the Germans never suspected a thing. She lived to the age of 98, passing away in 2011. Her ashes were scattered in the mountains of France, in the same valleys where she once fought. The legend Nancy Wake was not the kind of hero carved in marble. She was quick with her fists, quick with her tongue, and utterly unwilling to be told what she could or couldn't do. To her enemies, she was a ghost they could never catch. To her comrades, she was the woman who made them believe they could win. The White Mouse didn't just survive the cat, she beat it at its own game. Noor Inayat Khan, the spy princess, a childhood between worlds. She was born on New Year's Day 1914 in Moscow, Russia. Noor Inayat Khan's life began in a swirl of cultures and contradictions. Her father, Hazrat Inayat Khan, was a Sufi mystic from India, a man who believed in the unity of all religions. Her mother, Aura Ray Baker, was an American woman with deep Southern roots. Theirs was a home filled with music, poetry, and spirituality. The sound of the veena, an Indian stringed instrument, often drifted through the air, while candles flickered under the gaze of Rumi's verses written on parchment. When Noor was still a child, the family moved to France. They settled in a rambling house near Paris, where the gardens bloomed wild, and Noor spent her days writing fairy tales. She was shy, gentle, and imaginative, more inclined to dream than to fight. No one could have imagined that this quiet girl would one day become one of the most dangerous women in Nazi-occupied France. The storm approaches. In 1927, her father died suddenly, leaving Noor, her mother, and her siblings adrift. The loss was a shadow that followed her into adulthood. She found solace in music, studying harp and piano at the Paris Conservatory, and writing for French children's magazines. But by 1939, the storm that had been brewing in Europe broke. Germany invaded Poland, and war spread like wildfire. Noor, at 25, was already committed to the ideals of peace, but she also believed deeply in justice. When France fell to the Nazis in 1940, she fled with her family to England. Narrowly escaping the advancing German forces, London became their refuge. But for Noor's safety was not enough. She wanted to do something that mattered. A reluctant warrior, Noor's friends were stunned when she announced she was joining the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. She trained as a radio operator, a skill that would soon become her lifeline and her weapon. Her instructors noted her skill, but also her gentle nature. She was no soldier in temperament. She refused to carry a gun, insisting she could never take a life. And yet her ability to remain calm under pressure made her invaluable. It wasn't too long before she was recruited by the Special Operations Executive Churchill's secret army tasked with setting Europe ablaze. Her mission: to return to France as an undercover wireless operator, sending intelligence back to London while coordinating sabotage with the French resistance. It was without exaggeration one of the most dangerous jobs in the war. Wireless operators had an average life expectancy of 6 weeks. The jump into darkness. On the night of June 16, 1943, Noor boarded a Lysander aircraft bound for occupied France. The moon lit the clouds like silver, and below her the fields of Normandy stretched into shadow. When the pilot gave the signal, she jumped, her parachute opening silently above the dark countryside. She landed in a field, gathered her chute, and melted into the night. Her cover identity: Jean-Marie Renier, a children's nurse. By day she walked the streets of Paris as if she belonged there. By night she tapped out messages to London in Morse code, always aware that German listening vans were triangulating her position. The Gestapo called radio operators the most dangerous of spies and hunted them relentlessly. Alone in Paris within weeks, disaster struck. A mass arrest wiped out much of her network. The prosperous circuit most operators would have returned to London immediately. Noor refused. She became the only functioning wireless link between Paris and London. She moved, constantly changing safe houses, carrying her bulky radio set in a suitcase that seemed far too heavy for her slight frame. Her messages warned London of German troop movements, weapons shipments, and Gestapo crackdowns. Her signals were sometimes sent from attics, sometimes from cafes, sometimes even from rooftops. Every key she tapped was a risk. Every second on the air was a chance for the Germans to find her. The betrayal. In October 1943, her luck ran out. Someone, perhaps a double agent, betrayed her location. She was arrested by the Gestapo, her radio still warm from use. They brought her to Avenue Foch, their Paris headquarters, a place infamous for torture. The Germans were certain this quiet young woman would break quickly. They were wrong. Noor refused to give them a single name, a single address. She tried to escape twice, once by slipping through a bathroom window onto the rooftops, another time by overpowering a guard with 2 fellow prisoners. Both times she was recaptured. The Gestapo labeled her highly dangerous and sent her to Germany for further interrogation. Prisoner number 12. Noor was sent to Pforzheim prison. There she was kept in chains, hands and feet shackled for 10 months. She was beaten repeatedly, yet she never betrayed the resistance. In her cell she composed stories in her head, whispering them to herself to stay sane. The guards called her the Wild One because she fought every attempt to break her spirit. One guard later recalled, she had the eyes of someone who knew she was going to die, but she was not afraid. The final journey on September 11, 1940, for Noor was transferred to Dachau concentration camp, along with 3 other female SO agents: Madeleine Damermet, Yolande Beekman, and Eliane Plumin. At dawn they were led into the woods. Witnesses said Noor's last word was simple, clear and defiant. She was executed with a single shot to the back of the head. She was 30 years old. Aftermath and legacy. After the war, Noor was posthumously awarded the George Cross by Britain, the Croix de Guerre by France, and the MBE in London. A bronze bust of her stands in Gordon Square Gardens, the first memorial in Britain dedicated to an Asian woman. She is remembered not for her capacity for violence, but for her courage in refusing to abandon her principles. She fought a war without ever firing a gun. In the words of one of her colleagues, she was the most unlikely secret agent I have ever met, and the most heroic. Noor Inayat Khan's life was a bridge between worlds, between East and West, between faith and action, between gentleness and unimaginable courage. The Germans thought they could frighten her into silence. Instead, she died as she had lived, quietly, steadfastly, unbroken. The Sufi heritage. To understand Noor, we must first understand the philosophy that shaped her. Her father, Hazrat Inayat Khan, was not merely a musician. He was a spiritual pioneer. Born in Baroda, India, he came from a family of royal court musicians. But in his 20s he left everything behind to travel the world, spreading the message of Sufism, a mystical branch of Islam that emphasizes love, harmony, and beauty as the path to God. From him Noor inherited a sense of universality. Her home welcomed Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, and Buddhists alike. At the dinner table, the family might discuss Indian ragas one moment and Christian parables the next. This upbringing gave Noor a quiet confidence in diversity. She believed that human beings were connected by invisible threads of compassion, a belief that would later clash violently with the brutality of Nazi ideology. The early signs of resistance. Even as a teenager, Noor showed a moral courage that foreshadowed her wartime role in school. When other children mocked foreigners or those who looked different, Noor defended them, sometimes at the cost of her own popularity. When she began writing children as stories, they were often about the triumph of kindness over cruelty. In her tale The Yataka of the Horse, the hero refuses to abandon weaker companions. Despite great danger, her editors noticed the recurring theme, a hero's duty to protect others, though they could not have guessed that she was writing her own moral code. Training for the Shadows. Once recruited by the SO, Noor was sent to a series of secret training facilities across England. Her instructors evaluated her skills in sabotage, disguise, and survival. In one report, an instructor wrote, "She is not overburdened with physical strength, but she is quick, resourceful, and determined. Her dedication to duty is absolute." She struggled with firearms training, refusing in fact to shoot at human-shaped targets, but she excelled in wireless operation. Her fingers could tap out Morse code at an impressive 22 words per minute, and she had the rare ability to work for hours without losing concentration. Her instructors worried about her gentle nature, fearing she might be too soft for undercover work, but others argued that her quiet demeanor could be her greatest asset. No one would suspect this slight, soft-spoken young woman of being a dangerous spy, a web of allies and foes in Paris. Noor's covert work relied on a delicate web of trust. She coordinated with French resistance leaders, like Henri Dericourt, whose loyalties were later questioned, and worked to rebuild communication networks destroyed by German crackdowns. But the city was riddled with danger. German listening stations were mounted in vans, constantly patrolling the streets. If an operator transmitted for more than 20 minutes from one location, the chances of capture skyrocketed. Noor developed the habit of transmitting from gardens' attics. Even while pretending to be a seamstress mending clothes, there were whispers that the Gestapo had infiltrated some resistance groups. This meant every meeting, every handshake could be the last. Life in disguise. One of Noor's talents was slipping into roles. Disguise was not just a change of clothes, it was a change of being. She became a Parisian nurse, a governess, even a market vendor selling vegetables. She learned to carry herself with the easy arrogance of a local, to complain about food shortages in just the right tone, to curse the Germans in casual conversation so no one would suspect she was secretly passing their secrets to London. Her small stature allowed her to move through crowded streets without drawing attention, and her skill with languages, English, French, and some German, gave her an edge over many agents. The double agent theory. Historians have long debated the identity of the person who betrayed Noor. Some point to Renée Gary, the sister of another resistance member, who allegedly disclosed Noor's location to the Gestapo in exchange for money. Others suspect that German intelligence had been watching her movements for weeks, waiting for the right moment. The betrayal remains one of the unsolved mysteries of her story. Even in captivity, Noor never named her betrayer, perhaps to protect others from retribution, or to shield her family from grief. Resistance under torture at Avenue Foch. The interrogations were relentless. Noor was beaten, threatened, and offered false promises of freedom if she cooperated. A Gestapo officer later admitted she refused to give us a single detail. It was as though she had prepared her mind for this moment for years. Her fellow prisoners reported hearing her singing quietly in her cell old Sufi hymns her father had taught her. This spiritual strength baffled her captors, who were used to breaking people through fear. When she attempted her daring rooftop escape, it was not just an act of survival, but a calculated move to remind the Germans that they did not control her spirit. The final hours at Dachau. In her last hours, Noor walked calmly to the execution site. Survivors of Dachau recalled that she refused to be blindfolded. The SS officer who delivered the fatal shot later told another prisoner that she had faced him without flinching. In that moment, Noor became more than a spy. She became a symbol of unbroken will. In the face of tyranny, posthumous recognition. In the decades after the war, Noor's story almost faded from public memory. It was only in the 1990s that historians and filmmakers began to piece together her remarkable life. From So Records eyewitness accounts and family archives. In 2012, a memorial bust was unveiled in London by Princess Anne, marking the first public statue in Britain dedicated to a woman of Indian heritage who had served in the war. In 2018, her story was adapted into the film A call to spy, inspiring a new generation to learn about the spy princess. The enduring lessons Noor's life teaches us that courage is not always loud or forceful. Sometimes it is a quiet voice that refuses to be silenced. She entered the war without hatred, but with a sense of responsibility to protect the innocent. She faced the Gestapo without a weapon, armed only with the conviction that some truths are worth dying for. In her own words, written years before the war, she had once said, "One must not stand by and watch evil win." Even the smallest voice can carry the weight of justice. That voice still echoes today.